Please always consult with your physicians prior to making any changes to your treatment plan. Welcome to Living with Scanxiety, the Cancer Podcast, a podcast geared to help you navigate the pediatric cancer world. As a mother of a child who battled a soft tissue sarcoma for over a year, your host, Rosaria Kozar, understands and will help guide you through your journey. She brings the knowledge of experts, families, survivors, and other organizations tied to the pediatric cancer world to your doorstep. Her mission is to inform, support, and promote hope for you and your family.
You are probably not being given the most current things that are happening because, again, with data, everybody is looking for that paper or that case study or that trial information. And most of the treatments that are happening, because there isn't any research, it's all anecdotal information that individual neuro-oncologists have that they're doing, but they're not publishing or sharing it anywhere. And the only way to find that out is by talking to parents who are being treated somewhere and finding out what is your doctor doing, so you can take that back and tell your doctor.
Hi, this is Rosaria, and I am sitting here today with Natalie Naruzzi, and she is the mother of Vincent, a warrior battling brain cancer, specifically ATRT. We're going to hear a little bit about her story and some suggestions for parents out there. Also, we're going to talk about social media a little bit and how influential and how positive it can be for a parent to use it. I do know that it can be also a place where you have to be very careful, but we can find a lot of support through that. Anyways, thank you so much, Natalie, for coming to the show, and I welcome you.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and share Vincent's story. And, as September is coming up and we go gold, spread more awareness for our kids.
Absolutely. September is a huge month for going gold. I'm happy that you are ready for it and expect to see some interesting posts from you guys. Do you want to tell me a little bit about Vincent and his story?
Sure. So Vincent was diagnosed with ATRT, which is short for atypical teratoid rhabdoid tumors, at just 4 months old. He was born completely healthy, and right around the time that he turned 3 months old, I noticed that he had a very, very slight head tilt, something that only someone who's spending 24/7 with him would really notice. And it started to concern me because it was a regression of skills for him because he did have full head control and support. I took him to a pediatrician's sick visit, and they said that he had something called torticollis, which is a common condition newborns can be born with, where there's some tightening in the muscles in their neck and it creates a head tilt. And the standard treatment is physical therapy. So off to physical therapy we went, and after the first probably 2 visits, Vincent just didn't really seem to be responding to the physical therapist's different exercises, and she didn't really feel like he was presenting the way that she would expect. And I started doing some research, and I just disagreed with the fact that it was torticollis. So we were going back for a 4-month visit with our main pediatrician, not the one that we saw for the sick visit. And I expressed my concerns to her about the torticollis, thinking that we were going to get a referral to like an ortho doctor or something along those lines, that there was maybe some kind of musculoskeletal issue going on. And during our visit, she had measured his head, which is standard to be done during a 4-month visit, well check, and was very concerned because his head circumference had grown from about the 60th percentile to like the 99th percentile from his 2-month well visit. But he didn't appear to have a large head, and his head did not look abnormally large. It was just the difference in the growth rate. So his head was not actually large for his age. It was the difference between the 2 months of growth. So she was part of the CHOP network. We go to Children's Hospital Philadelphia, or CHOP, and sent us a referral actually to a neurologist. And We left the pediatrician's office. She told me to call, make an appointment. And if I didn't get one soon, to call her back and let her know. And she would try to help us move it up. So I called, I got an appointment for probably about 4 weeks later, which I actually thought wasn't super bad for a specialist. And I called the doctor's office. I let them know. And 10 minutes later, I got a phone call back from neurology telling us to come to that day in about 2 hours. So I told my husband, my daughter had a softball game. I had to get somebody else to take her. And we drove to the hospital thinking we were going to see a neurologist. I thought for hydrocephalus, I was familiar with that. And I thought this is what he has. He has hydrocephalus. That's why they're sending us there. He probably needs a shunt. And, not really, still not like each way we're driving, I'm thinking, you're pushing the line on like worst case scenario. Well, let it just be this, let it just be hydrocephalus and he just needs a shunt. Let it, and kind of like moving that line of like worst case scenario. And we went into the neurologist's office and the fellow came in. And I remember he said, do you know why you're here? And my husband and I looked at each other with, these expressions like, oh, this is serious. He told me to stop nursing Vincent, that we were going to need to do an MRI, and started asking us a whole, slew of questions, and really seemed to be concerned or surprised that he was not having any vomiting, or he wasn't lethargic, that he hadn't become unresponsive at any point in time. He had absolutely no other symptoms other than the head tilt. I've nursed him. He was with me 24/7. He never had any other issues that seemed abnormal for an infant. I have another child. I'm familiar with nursing and infants and things like that. So they sent us to the emergency room for a stat MRI, and it had to just be a haste MRI, which they do real quick because he couldn't go under anesthesia since he had just nursed. They came back into the emergency room and told us that he had brain tumors and that neurosurgery would be in to talk to us, that we were getting admitted to the PICU immediately. They didn't say how many. I had no idea, if it was 1, if it was 10. They said brain tumors, and that was pretty much it. Neurosurgery came in, they pulled up some imaging on the screen, and I always look at MRIs and imaging and have absolutely no idea what I'm looking at. But when I saw the MRI of his brain on that screen, I 100% had no doubt in my mind that that was not what it was supposed to look like. And this was very, very serious. I honestly looked at it and thought like this was impossible because he's fine. And so they immediately admitted us to the PICU. We were scheduled for brain surgery the next day. He went in for a craniotomy on one of the tumors. He ended up having 2 tumors. One was basically destroying the right ventricle of his brain. It was 9 centimeters large. He was only 4 months old. And the other one was in his posterior fossa region, very close to the brain stem, and it was inoperable. So our neurosurgeon told us, this is too big for me to get, and this isn't going to be his cure. We know this is cancer. There's 2 tumors. I think I know what it is, but obviously we need to biopsy it, and I'm not going to take the whole thing because it's too risky, and we know he needs treatment for the other one anyway. So after about 10 hours, he came out of surgery, and he had gotten about 40% of the tumor, and Vincent was partially paralyzed on the left side of his body. Once the biopsy results came back, it was actually worse than what we initially had thought it was, and we got the ATRT diagnosis. We were told by our initial neuro-oncologist that we kind of just got randomly assigned that the chances of survival were almost zero for several factors, that ATRT just is extremely hard to survive. And also because of his age and the fact that he had more than 1 tumor, and that the treatment itself is very harsh and could kill him. So she suggested that we actually take him home and just try to keep him comfortable for whatever the remainder of his life was. That wasn't something that we were going to do. So we moved forward with treatment. We changed neuro-oncologists. to have somebody that fit our family better at the same hospital, but just a different primary leading Vincent's care. And we went for it for this really intense treatment protocol. And it was a hard 6 months of induction chemotherapy with some of the worst, chemos out there. Cisplatin, doxorubicin, everything, carboplatin, vincristine, he had it all. And after 6 months, they said that the tumors had shrunk, and our neurosurgeon was willing to go back in and try to get both of them into separate craniotomies. So he was about 10 months old, and he had his second and third craniotomy just 7 days apart, and they were able to completely resect both tumors at the time. He went into a maintenance treatment protocol, which was still intense IV chemo, but less than what he was getting during the 6 months. And typically kids would have radiation at that point, but because he was so young and he had 2 tumors, radiation was not an option because he needed full cranial spinal radiation. So I get that question a lot because people say, oh, I know, a kid who was 10 months old and they had proton radiation. Because there were 2 tumors, it couldn't be targeted. He needed full cranial spinal radiation, and no hospital is going to do that to a 10-month-old. So the age of 3 is usually the limit, and that's not really, they don't really like to do it then either. So that was completely off the table for us. And so we moved into this maintenance chemo, which started off okay. And then in the 4th month of that cycle, Vincent had a reaction to one of the chemos that it was the second time he was ever exposed to it. And he went into acute liver failure in a matter of 12 hours. It was the fastest case of VOD. Initially, they called it VOD, veno-occlusive disease, which is common in patients who have transplants. Vincent was not a transplant patient. And it progressed very rapidly beyond the point of what is expected between VOD, and he was in full-on liver failure. He was on life support. They called, I had come home, my husband was there, and he called me at 1:30 in the morning and said, you need to come back. They said that we need to start making end-of-life care decisions. And so the next morning, we spoke with our team, and we started making these talking about making these impossible decisions. And somehow, like always, Vincent pulled through, and all of a sudden, slowly but surely, his numbers started to reverse, and he had an abdominal drain. They pulled 2 liters of fluid off of his stomach in the first day, and he was on dialysis. And I mean, it was a long road. His bilirubin was like 80 at one point in time. He was having neurotoxicity, and it was, we were supporting one organ, which was causing another one to fail, and just trying to patch Band-Aids everywhere. And we got really lucky that he made it through that. But that also meant that we couldn't continue that treatment protocol anymore. He couldn't have that drug anymore, which was like the backbone of that. And we already had to dose reduce on a bunch of other chemos. So that wasn't really an option. And we were kind of left in a situation where we didn't know what to do, and we needed to let his liver recover. So of course, when you start treatment, you're thinking, I don't want to put this poison into my kid. But then when you have to stop and you're not ready to stop, and that treatment plan's not over, that's even scarier. So after searching, we sought out second, third, fourth opinions from all of the other top, brain cancer programs throughout the US and Canada, and talked to them. The decision was for Vincent to have one high-dose chemotherapy cycle with a stem cell rescue afterwards, which was really scary because a side effect of that is VOD, which he just came out of liver failure for. And so we didn't know if that was going to trigger that happen, how damaged his liver really truly was. And he did the transplant, and he did amazingly well. We were one of the fastest discharges out of transplant at CHOP, and he went off treatment at that point in time. I had wanted to go on an additional inhibitor type maintenance treatment afterwards, but it just had not been done, and there was no data on it anywhere. And our team just didn't feel comfortable without having data, without having data to go on. And so we went off treatment, and 5 months later, Vincent relapsed with a new tumor, so a third tumor in a new location. And we were lucky that it was in the location it was in the pineal region, which is the dead center section of your brain and is always almost impossible to resect. But because Vincent didn't have typical brain anatomy because of his first tumor, pretty much creating empty space, our neurosurgeon had a direct pathway to go right into it and not have to touch any brain tissue. And he was able to get it all again. So we sought out other opinions. We started a new chemo regimen that involved a lot of intrathecal chemo. Vincent gets chemotherapy injected into his spine, and this way it circulates through the central nervous system, because there's a lot of chemos we don't know if it crosses into the brain, and this way you know for sure that it's getting in there. So we started doing a lot of that and some oral chemos. And about 4 months into that, there were some suspicious spots that we started watching. And by 6 months, we knew that it was another new tumor. So now we were at our fourth tumor, and we went in for it again. And it was a new location, and we got it all again. And Vincent started an inhibitor drug that he's still currently on now, which he is the only child that I know of, I'm almost positive, that is taking that drug off trial, has obtained it commercially, and is also using an adjunct therapy along with it. And he's one of 2 other children I know who have been on this drug for more than a year, or at least a year. It was a drug that at the time that he was diagnosed, we had read a study about, and there was a lot of promise, or a lot of chatter about it happening, being a promising drug. And the trial was shut down because another patient had developed a secondary cancer. And so they shut that trial down. It ended up opening back up again, but we couldn't get on it because when you resect, you have no measurable disease. And when you have no measurable disease, you can't get on the trial, even though a full resection gives you best chance of things working. So we taught Vincent to swallow pills at 2.5 years old, because that was the only way to get that medication. It's commercially approved for 2 different types of adult cancers, and it only comes in pill unless you get it through the trial. So that was it. It was life or death. So we taught him how to swallow the pills, and 8 days after that surgery, he started those pills. And we, have just been fortunate that it's been continuing to work for the last year. He actually just on August 8th was actually a year, 1 whole year that he's been taking that medication. And this is the longest period of time that he's gone without having a relapse. And he tolerates it really well, and he's doing much better now. And we have a scan on Thursday.
So you're dealing with this anxiety on top of all of this. Wow, I really admire you as a caretaker, being able to stand by his side. And I know those difficult decisions when it comes down to it, and they're asking you to make those. I am also applauding you because you taught a 2-year-old how to swallow a pill. You deserve a gold medal for that. That is not easy. So it's great that you found a way to kind of sort of get around that barrier of this trial, and you were able to get that for him. And what made you turn to social media? Because I've watched so much of him going through his ups and downs.
Initially, we started a Facebook page because we were having a fundraiser, a beef and beer, to help support our family with all of these ridiculous medical costs that you incur. And so it was really, the intent was initially to share information more locally in our community about the beef and beer and about Vincent, so we could get more people to come out and support it. And then I was typically a pretty private person, didn't really share anything about myself on social media prior to this. And then it just became, he was only 4 months old. So many people were just moved by his story that I was just getting bombarded with messages and texts and questions and, people asking for more information. And it became an easy way to share that information. And then when we were, in the hospital, we pretty much spent the first 6 months in the hospital with only a handful of days home. at night when we would be sitting there listening to the monitors beep when you can't sleep, it's cathartic for me to write. I've always enjoyed writing, and it just kind of was an outlet. And so I just started kind of sharing that. And the more I shared and the more I shared about Vincent, the more people joined in and following his story and, praying for him or sending him positive vibes or supporting our family through different fundraisers. And I ended up finding a whole side of social media that, I didn't really know existed, because there are so many negative aspects of it. And you see so many, horror stories and things like that, which we have dealt with as well. It hasn't all been positive, but
oh, wow.
The positive has definitely outweighed any of the negative, and has been worth sharing his story, particularly because it helps us a lot financially, because people learn about a story and they support our fundraisers, or they support things that we're doing, like Vincent's an ambassador for the CHOP Parkway Run, which raises money for CHOP's research. And so we have a team, and, people support that team. And so they're helping to support research through his story. And so, to share that kind of stuff, to share about other organizations that are out there to help parents and things like that, but really connecting with other parents that have ATRT. This is such a rare disease. Only about 60 kids a year get it. And there's not really any information sharing that takes place between hospitals that are treating children with ATRT. And so if you are at a hospital who does not have a lot of experience treating ATRT, or not one of the top, hospitals, you are probably not being given the most current things that are happening, because again, with data, everybody is looking for that paper or that case study or that trial information. And most of the treatments that are happening, because there isn't any research, it's all anecdotal information that individual neuro-oncologists have that they're doing, but they're not publishing or sharing it anywhere. And the only way to find that out is by talking to parents who are being treated somewhere and finding out what is your doctor doing, so you can take that back and tell your doctor, and then say, Dr. So-and-so at CHOP is doing this with an ATRT patient there. Can we reach out to them and see? And they can tell you and guide you, so you have some reasoning, to go to your review board and say, this is why we're doing this. I was fortunate in that the fact that prior to Vincent being diagnosed, I have connections in the medical community. I've worked in the medical community for a long time, and actually have done a lot of fundraising efforts for cancer research. And so I was familiar with a lot of things that happen, in the background of how these trials and some of the research and stuff like that works. So I was able to utilize some of those resources to help me navigate some of that information, particularly initially, that I wouldn't have been able to find on my own. And then, just connecting with other parents and finding out what they're doing. And Vincent, for example, being on this medication that he's on now and obtaining it commercially, even though it's for adults, and getting it approved, which our case manager was amazing at doing. I have 3 other parents whose physicians contacted ours and asked, how did you get this approved? And he helped them, and their kids now were able to obtain it commercially as well, and not waste any time, because that is the biggest thing is wasting time when you have a relapse in an aggressive cancer like this, and waiting the 6 weeks for a matching on a trial, or from getting back to you, or having a washout period, or all these things. And in ATRT, that's it. Like that, if you have to wait that long, you have pretty much have no chance. So, even this medication that he's on now, I feel like the trial results, which are not promising, are probably not truly reflective of what this drug is meant to do as an inhibitor, right? As an inhibitor to inhibit the cancer from growing. You need to not have massive amounts of disease to give it a chance. And when kids are coming in, with their brains and spines full of tumors, and you're putting them just on an inhibitor because you can't have an adjunct therapy to it, what are you really doing there? You're like, it's a wildfire. It's out of control. You have no chance at that point in time. So where we were able to resect and then, start it, that may be the difference, starting with no disease or very low disease burden. And a lot of neurosurgeons don't want to do that surgery because they say, well, what are you going to do after this? The surgery is not the cure. What's your other treatment? And this can, be that option, or at least try to be that option for other parents who were told there were no options. And so, now they are trying it as well. And those parents whose kids also had resections or very low disease burden, their kids have been doing pretty well on the drug too. So, a lot of the ways that we're going to get new treatments are not going to happen from the research or the trials that are not being funded. It's anecdotal information of parents sharing that, and neuro-oncologists being willing to and not having an ego in sharing the information on what they're seeing and what they're doing in their own practices. And so that's really been my main reason now for continuing to be very transparent about what we're doing with Vincent and giving very, very detailed information on everything that he's going through. Besides the fact that I also want to just bring general awareness of like what our kids do go through when they have cancer in general, because you would never know. You would never know. You see the happy, smiling, bald kids on the commercials, and you have no idea what's really taking place behind the walls of these hospitals or in our home. Or, people think, oh, when you're done treatment, your cancer's, gone forever. And like, no, Vincent's disabled for life. He is starting to walk now, but he's never going to walk with a typical gait pattern. And we don't know what type of usage he'll ever have with his left arm. And he's globally developmentally delayed. And he has all of these different things that he would not have had if he didn't have cancer. They are caused by cancer. They are the side effects of these harsh treatments, and we don't even know the long term of it.
Mm-hmm. It's similar to the community. No, not similar to the community, but the community phrase of childhood cancer. There is no such thing as cured, because once you go past that 5 years, you're going to have. Technically you're quote unquote cured, but then you're going to have the late effects or after effects of it. And it sounds like online, it's almost like family, but at the same time, they're having a bunch of consultants to work with. And what would you say to somebody that's on the fence of going and starting an online or social media page for their child?
I mean, it's definitely a hard decision. It's not for everybody. There's definitely people on both sides of the fence that think that it's the right way to go, and people who think that you're exploiting your child or that it's not the right way to go. You really just have to feel comfortable with what you're doing and feel comfortable with what you're sharing. And you have to be prepared for there will be negativity. Things are not always going to be great. You can get into the situation where, you feel like it can get overwhelming. Sometimes when we would have situations where we'd have bad scans and I knew that everybody was waiting, I felt like I needed to share because I was like letting all these other people down. I knew they were waiting and they were bombarding me with questions, and that can definitely be overwhelming. I've gotten better at that. I mean, we've been doing this now for 3 years. So I've definitely kind of gotten to the point where I'm just like, I don't really care. I'll tell you when I want to tell you. But really be prepared for just having your life is out there, what you put out there. People are not going to like it. Some people are going to make nasty comments. We had a situation. My biggest thing that I will say is use a watermark or something on your photos and your videos of your children that you're sharing that is specific to your child, because people, sickos, they steal photos for all kinds of reasons to make fake GoFundMes and use your kids' stories to get people, for all different kinds of malicious purposes. Unfortunately, we have had it happen to us. That's when I started hashtagging all of Vincent's photos and videos. And that's the reason why somebody stole all of his photos and created a fake GoFundMe. Somebody created a fake Venmo account and things like that, and just basically took all of his photos. And another account on Instagram was using his photos to like sell T-shirts and things like that. So I learned the hard way when that had happened that I needed to put something better on there, so that if somebody saw that photo, they knew that this person it didn't belong to them. And it's just a deterrent. People will still take them. I'm not saying that they won't. They will if they really want to. They won't care. But it is a deterrent for someone who's out there looking to really run a scam by having some type of watermark that can't be removed without really changing the photo itself in a location that really makes any type of erasing of it obvious that the photo was altered or a chunk of your child's face is missing or something like that. So that isn't.
I have noticed yours, by the way. I remember when you didn't have it because I've been following you forever, and then you put it up and I said, oh, they must have been hacked. But yeah, watermarking is huge. So if for parents, when you're going out there, watermark. And what can you tell me what you use to watermark? So if a parent wants to go out there.
Well, I honestly, in the beginning, I was looking at all these apps, like, what am I going to use the watermark? This is so complicated. I honestly just use it. I just put Vincent the Conqueror, his hashtag with the text app on my phone that I can just write right over. I don't use a specific watermark. I make it obvious. I don't really care if it's obvious. It's my kid in my photo. If you don't like that a big Vincent the Conqueror hashtag is across it, that's too bad. So that's what I do. It's quick and easy. I don't take a lot of time to edit my photos. I do everything on my phone. I write on my phone. I upload from there. Everyone will say, like, I'm not in photos a lot because I take them of my husband, but I don't go on his phone to get his photos that he takes of me and upload them. I use what I have. I try to make it quick and easy. I don't have time to be editing and planning all this stuff out. So maybe people who are more technologically advanced than I am have an easy way to watermark and they want to download an app or use it, but I just use the text feature on the actual photo itself and edit it and just use the hashtag across the center.
Well, it's nice to know that you have that ability, because clearly I'm a business, so I use something different, but to be able to just do it off your phone, it's great for somebody that is on the fence about starting, now knows that they can watermark easily from their phone. So that's a great thing. And do you have any last comments before we start the last segment of the interview?
When you were talking about the survival rate and, you're never cured, is one of the things that really bothers me about that survival rate is that, our kids can survive from diagnosis until 5 years past. They can die the day after they live for 5 years and they're still considered survivors. We have a friend with ATRT that just happened to. It was like 5 years and a handful of days since he had been diagnosed. He's considered a survivor, but he died of ATRT relapse. But because it was 5 years from the initial date of diagnosis, he's a survivor. So when we look at those statistics that look like there's such large survival rates, they're so skewed and not really presenting the true picture.
Absolutely, because even if you get the flu and you're within the 5-year mark, you're considered on the opposite spectrum. So, or if you get into a car wreck, you're considered on the opposite. So for me, I'm glad you kind of brought that up. Stats don't matter, and they really don't. You're either on one side or the other. Anyways, don't get me going down that lane too far. I think we both agree.
That's a whole other episode.
I know. We can split it into two. So to the last part of the episodes, I usually just kind of try to change up the vibe and going to just ask you some random questions and answer them the best you can. So the first question is, if you could tell the future or read minds, what would you do?
Find out why people are not funding childhood cancer research. I would read their minds to find out why they really aren't doing it, so that I could change their minds.
That works for me. The next question being, what song represents your life right now?
I think I Won't Back Down by Tom Petty.
That's a good one. In one sentence, what is your life's mission?
Well, now it is to make sure that I do everything possible to help end childhood cancer.
So my final question is not really cancer related. What is your spirit animal if you had to choose one?
A hard question. I think it's an owl.
An owl. I like that. That's a good one. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. And it was great to have a conversation with you. I've followed you for a long time as well. So nice to kind of have a little face-to-face of the people that you follow and, the stories and everything that becomes so important to you.
Thank you for tuning in to Living with Scanxiety. Please subscribe to hear more informative discussions like today's.